So I'm going to dive in. I know we're going to have a bunch more people join. But first off, welcome everyone to the productivity training. I am clearly not Austin Netzley. So we ended up having a scheduling conflict, and I gladly took over this training because, to be honest, this is one of my favorite topics. And just a couple things as we kick this off. So first off, there is going to be a lot to cover here. So Pat and some of the coaches are in the chat. So as we're going through this, if you guys have any questions along the way, definitely post them up in the chat. These guys and girls will be answering it as we go through. But additionally, I'll make sure I leave some time at the end for Q&A, and I can even stay on a little bit longer if needed. Second thing I want you guys to think about and keep in mind as we do this, what we're going to be talking about here, I want you to really focus on the underlying principles and not necessarily the implementation. And the reason I say that is everybody here is in a different situation, whether you're in a relationship or not, whether you have kids or not, where your business is at, how many team members you have. So what I want you guys to do is not focus so much on specifically like what I'm talking about, but more the underlying principles and how you can then relate that back. And then third thing I want you to keep in mind is that the goal is not to just take all of these and try to implement them all at once. The goal is to look at where you're at now, take one of these that resonates with you and work on actually implementing it next week and get the benefit. Because the key to productivity is not necessarily trying to get more done. The key is being able to take one thing at a time and continuously get the right things done in a more efficient way. So that's my little disclaimer before we dive in. Like I said, if you guys have any questions along the way, post them up in the chat, and then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. All right, so diving in, the problem is that there's never enough time. And, if you guys have come into the program, you've probably said this on your survey. One of the biggest things we see in the 90-day or the 7-figure survey when you guys kick things off is really just being overwhelmed and not having enough time. But the reality is that time is actually not the problem. So what we're going to talk about today is 5 of the real productivity problems that come up and disguise themselves as time. So first thing is really having a lack of clarity. And this comes at multiple different levels. So we'll dive in and we'll talk to that. Second thing is not being able to prioritize. And we'll specifically be talking about urgent versus important. So we'll talk about how to distinguish the difference and then where you really want to be focusing your time and energy. The third, and this is probably one that comes up the most often out of anything, is really just our mindset and our ability to let things go, especially as the business grows. From that, when we do actually have the ability to let things go, is then not actually knowing how to do that. Meaning, how do you actually delegate so that the balls aren't dropped and it doesn't actually take you more time? So we'll definitely dive in and talk about how to delegate the right way versus the wrong way. And then finally, what it all comes back to, which we have Mr. Pat Bennett on the call. Pat always brings it back to, hey guys, the plan is great. How do we simplify it and how do we focus more? So we'll end things around with that. Okay, so starting things off, lack of clarity. If we look at most people's day, it looks like this. You wake up in the morning, hopefully you have quite a bit of energy. And then what ends up happening is that you're working in a lot of different directions. You've got a giant task list and you're doing a bunch of different things. And what ends up happening when you're working and splitting your attention across various things is that you end up doing something called a context switch. And so that means you're starting to work on one thing. Can everyone just mute if you guys have a chance? Thank you. And what ends up happening is you're focused on one thing, things are going good, and then your attention gets shifted somewhere else. And so what ends up happening every time your attention gets shifted is you actually take time to switch your mind between what you were working on and what you're working on now. And so the more that you end up doing that, you end up getting to the end of the day and you feel like, man, I did a lot, but I feel like I got nothing done. So what we want to do is shift away from your energy going into a lot of different areas and ultimately getting your energy all focused in one area. Because if we can, one, eliminate the context switch of having to change the activities and the focus all the time, you're going to be more productive anyways. But two, if you can get one major thing accomplished every day, that built up day after day, week after week over time is what really builds momentum in. So if you guys look back at the times where you feel like you were spending a lot of time but not really getting things done, you were probably trying to get too many different things done and not the most important thing that was going to move the needle. So I know a handful of people on this call have read the book Essentialism. That's essentially where these images come from. But it really is a game changer when you can shift to how do I get everything on my to-do list done? And instead say, what's the most important thing? And how can I go deep and get that thing done? So oftentimes then the next question comes back to, well, Tom, what is the most important thing? How do I figure that out? And the reality is that this starts with your vision. And it's the reason that one of the first things that we have you guys do when you join 2X is that vivid vision activity. And, sometimes people are resistant to this, or they say, like, this is hard. And the answer is yes, it is hard, right? It's actually pretty easy to execute once we know where we're going. But until you're super clear on where you want to go, it can definitely be a challenge to then figure out what the right things are to do. And very often we skip over getting clear on the vision, and then we end up doing a lot of action, but we ultimately don't end up with the result we want. So what we want to be thinking about is it starts with your vision. And I really want you guys to keep in mind that it starts with your life vision, right? It starts with figuring out what do you want your life to look like in the future? And then we build the business as a vehicle to help get you there, right? So when we start with the vision, what we can then do is break the vision down into goals. And we'll start out really with annual goals. So how do you take this vision in the future and figure out where do you want to be a year from now? When you've got clarity on where you want to be a year from now, we then start breaking that down. What does that look like quarterly and specifically over the next quarter? Then we look at how does that quarterly plan or the 90-day plan break down into months? How does that month break down into weeks? And ultimately, how does that plan break down into days? So this may seem like a lot, but what we end up doing is we get super clear on then what I need to focus on today that's going to get me to my weekly goals. And then weekly, what I need to focus on that's going to get me to my monthly goals, and so on. So the whole process that we want you guys to start thinking about, even if you look at like the 90-day sprint, what we're really doing is starting to get you guys to think quarterly about what are the top 3 goals that you want to achieve for the quarter. And then we break those down into the sprint roadmap of then monthly and then weekly. We're working through on the coaching call what you should be focused on next, and based on how things are going, where you go next. So this is so important, and you may not necessarily have it all dialed in all at once, but it's important to basically say, are we headed in the right direction? And then are we using each of these check-in points to make sure that we're working on the right things? And just like a GPS, we have a destination, we have a starting point. The most important thing is not necessarily the plan, but checking in and making sure that when we get off the plan, that we end up making adjustments to get back on. So when we have clarity on where we're going and what we focus on, the next thing is then prioritizing. And so this is something that I've gone back to time and time again. It's called the Eisenhower quadrant. And basically, if you look at any of the tasks that you could be spending time on, they can be grouped somewhere on here in terms of the level of urgency and the level of importance. And so if we look at these quadrants, one is things that are urgent and important. Then we got things that are important and non-urgent, ultimately down to things that are non-urgent and non-important, down to quadrant 4 where they're urgent and non-important. And just want to take a second, get some feedback from you guys. Where do you think you spend most of your time today? Quadrant 1, 2, 3, or 4? So type that in the chat. And Pat, as we get those coming through, you want to just read out what people are saying?
I sure will. I'm just deciding on how honest I'm going to be with myself about where I spend my time at the moment. So we've got Kate, quadrant 2, Kyle, quadrant 2, Craig, 2 now, Thomas, 2, Bass, 2, Marcos, 1.
So there's one of 2 things going on here. Either you guys are truly rocking it, or we don't have complete honesty. And I'm guessing it's a little bit of both, because as much as I would love to say that I'm always in quadrant 2, going to be completely honest, and I was just chatting with Pat about this, there's definitely times where I get pulled back into quadrant 1. So most people, especially before they join 2X, are spending their time in the urgent. And some of that's important, but a lot of it isn't. And this is what ends up causing us to feel like we're doing a lot, but not getting the results we're looking for. And so one of the things that we have you guys do when you join is that XDS activity. And we recommend that this isn't just a one-time activity, but it's something that you keep going back to. Because what this will help us do is to understand what are all the things that you're spending time on. And then what we can start doing is saying, out of that, what is the most important, right? And oftentimes what ends up happening is we end up being caught in the urgent now, but just one step at a time, we start saying, how do we get urgent things off of our plate? So we do less time in quadrant 1, and we really want to get to quadrant 2, like a lot of you guys defined. So our goal as time goes on is to do less urgent and be working more on the important things that are non-urgent. And what that means is that we can then actually plan for things and adjust and not having to just react. So reactivity is such a big challenge when we're trying to actually be productive and move forward.
You can feel that too, Tom, just throwing in there that once you feel like you get to the end of the week and you feel like you achieve things, you move the needle on what you were trying to achieve, but you don't feel burnt out, it's like nirvana. You really do feel like you have gone to another level.
Yeah, Pat, and let me just ask you, so it feels like in the last couple of weeks, you've really been in this flow. Like, what are some of the key things that you've been able to do that's helped you get there?
The biggest thing is taking the time to plan, like just drawing a line in the sand and saying, okay, there is too much going on. I'm stopping for the next 90 minutes and I am getting control back and just owning up to what you're not going to get done. So what I find, as soon as I overcommit to things, my focus is going everywhere. But as soon as I sort of draw the line and say, okay, it's getting out of control, stop. I can only get this much done today because this is the time in my calendar. This is how much time I've got in the calendar tomorrow. So this is what the week's going to look like. Everything, I have to do that this week. I have to prioritize. Now I move it back things into the week after, as well as go back a few slides to knowing where you're heading. We've got so much more clarity now with annual, quarterly, monthly, weekly, that it just makes the dailies and weeklies so much easier.
Yeah, 100%. And, if you don't have all of that in place now, it's just knowing that you want to incrementally start planning more and more out. So a lot of times it might just be, let me start with planning my day. And once I got a good handle on what I'm getting done today and I'm executing there good, now let's move to the week and move beyond that. So realize that this doesn't all start from day one. A lot of times it's incrementally getting there. And one of our favorite tools to be able to actually help you guys get out of reacting is actually called our 0% reactivity. And it's something super simple, which basically says anytime you're reacting to something, which what we defined is basically, does something need to be done within the next 48 hours? Every time that comes up, just make a note of it. And what we then want to do at the end of the week is review that and figure out what we can do to make sure that we're not having to react in the future. So step one for this is simply, when something is causing you to react, capture it, right? Doesn't have to take a lot of time, but what you're then going to have is a list of things that you're reacting to. And now that we have that list, what we can do is actually go back and solve the underlying issue. So I like to talk about this by solving problems twice. And what I mean by that is, the first time we solve the problem, we're solving the immediate issue right now so that whatever is coming up right now gets solved. So for example, if there's a customer issue going on, the first thing we want to do is go and make sure that customer is supported and has what they need. Then what we want to do, and a lot of people miss this step, is we want to go back and say, why did that issue come up in the first place? And what's the underlying root cause that I can put a system fix in place so it doesn't happen again? So I just want to give you guys a quick example. One of my businesses is real estate investing. We had the power turned off at one of our commercial buildings. So first things first, called the company, said, why did it turn off? You didn't pay a bill. All right, let's pay the bill and get it turned back on. Then we went back and said, well, we never received a bill. What's going on? What we ended up finding out was that a previous tenant had left, but the utilities never got transferred over into our name. So they never sent the bills to our address and we never got the email. So we didn't know that the bill wasn't being paid until they shut it off. So then we said, well, what can we do to make sure that doesn't happen again? We went back and said, when a tenant moves out, one of our checks is to call the utility company and make sure it gets transferred back into our name. So now that issue won't come up again because we fixed the system so that we're not having to react. So you guys can see, I actually just pulled this morning. This is my current reactivity log. And you'll see there's a whole bunch of items on there from different parts of our company. And what we do at the end of every week is go back and say, what are the system fixes that we can make so that we're not having to be as reactive? So this is such a simple concept, but it's really a game changer, and it's going to allow you guys to get out of reactive and urgent mode and really into important and non-urgent.
Tom, just on that, Marcos is us to, do we track our hours for that? I've just written back, I don't actually do that. I just do it with, at the end of the day, if I don't hit something in my calendar, then it goes in the reactivity log.
Yep. What I always come back to, so my answer is the same. I don't necessarily track hours. Anytime I'm tracking something, I always want to say, what's the reason for tracking this? And am I going to do something with that data? So if you're finding that an issue is consistently coming up again, and there's value in tracking how much time that takes, it might help you prioritize. So for example, with some people, they might have a giant list, especially when they get started, and they're not sure which one to tackle first. So if you are approximating or tracking hours on this, it might then allow you to say, which ones do you prioritize? So if it's going to help, go ahead and track it. Like Pat, I personally don't. Okay, second thing that's really going to help with not being reactive is planning ahead. And so once again, I went and grabbed my calendar this morning. And one of the things you guys will see on there is that on Sundays, I've actually got time reoccurring every week to plan. And so you don't necessarily have to do this on Sundays. Doesn't necessarily have to be 2 hours, but pick a time each week where you can basically reflect on the previous week, what went well, what didn't go well, and then look forward and say, based on that and based on my numbers and my goals and where things are at, what do I have to focus on this week to really move things forward? So I'll tell you, when you start Monday, and if you don't exactly know what you're doing, you're automatically starting out reacting, and the week is probably going to just continue that way. But if you can plan out the week ahead, so by the time you sit down Monday and you're ready to go, you already know what you're going to focus on, you instantly start taking control of the week. So planning ahead is going to make such a big difference and allow you to really say, what should I be focused on? And making sure that you're not having to react to the things that are coming up. Second piece of this, once you plan ahead and you know the most important things, is then a concept that we call done by 10:30. And once again, you guys can take a look at my calendar and see that every morning I've got time blocked out from 5:30 to 10:30 for my done by 10:30. And this is something where when I walk through this concept with you, I want you to really focus on the principles and not necessarily the nuances of how we run it. Because what we found is that everyone ends up running this a little different. But the underlying concept is before you start your day, you already have an idea of what your big 3 things are to accomplish that day. So you already know what the most important things are, and you kick off your morning with your morning routine. And so your routine could look different than everyone else's. For me personally, I wake up, I drink 2 glasses of water, I meditate for 10 minutes, I do a little bit of learning or reading, and then I get started for my day. So that's my morning routine. Everyone's got a little bit different. Then the biggest thing you want to do before you check email, before you check notifications, before you let anyone else's priority come into your world, you focus on the one thing and you do a 50-minute sprint. And essentially this means that before anything else comes up, you're dedicating time to the most important thing. And so this concept goes back to what's called Pomodoro. And basically what this means is that Parkinson's law is where basically the amount of time a task takes you will likely expand to fill however much time you get it. So it's amazing how if you say, hey, I've got 2 hours dedicated to this, it takes you 2 hours to do. Where if you suddenly say, I've got to get this done in an hour, you somehow manage to get it done in an hour. So what we want to do with these sprints is actually take advantage of that and give ourselves either 25 or 50 minutes. And what this ends up doing is it forces us to commit and be focused on one thing during that time. So literally set a timer, set your phone, and what you're going to do is say, for the next 25 or 50 minutes, I'm going to focus on this one thing, the most important thing to move things forward. When you get done with that, you then take a 5 or 10 minute break, get up, move around, and then you continue on and you do a second sprint. So now let me just take a step back. Imagine if you go from where you are today to suddenly, before anything else comes up, you're doing 2 sprints of dedicated time focusing on the most important thing. Just imagine what that will do and how that will stack up over time when you're first starting with important and not urgent. Once you get done with your second sprint, this is where we'll often then check in with the team. So for example, we run our teams out of Slack. So this is where we'll check in and make sure, hey, is anything else coming up? Is anything urgent that the team needs from me? And then run a third sprint. And so if we look at this, by the time we get done with this, we now have 3 of the most important things done, or 3 of our sprints finished. And then we'll review how our done by 10:30 went. This is where we can potentially check email. We'll prepare to do the huddle with our team. And then we'll do our daily huddle, which is just a quick check-in with the team. Make sure everyone's aware of like what they're working on, what they got done, what's in the way. Then if you want, you can work out, breakfast, whatever else makes sense. And at the end of the day, you now say, hey, I've essentially got more done by 10:30 than most people get done in their entire day. So now you say, based on how things have gone, let me replan the rest of my day. So we call this done by 10:30, but I just want to share a couple of things. One, it doesn't necessarily mean that 10:30 is the right time for you. 2, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to stack it up this way. So for example, I have kids, and what I end up doing between one of my sprints is spending the morning with the kids, right? So I've shifted some of this around, but the underlying principle to keep in mind is that before anyone else's priorities come into your world, you want to be able to dedicate time to the most important thing. Okay. So just review there, couple key things. When you get started, you might just only be able to start with 1 sprint, but you want to work up to get 3 sprints a day. Big thing with this is you want to come in prepared. So you don't want to start your day, sit down and say, all right, what are my big 3 things? You want to make sure you get those done the night before. You want to make sure that you're not reacting to things and that you're truly working on the most important thing, at least until your second sprint. So there might be things, for example, when you check in with your team that need to be taken care of. But before you ever get to that, you want to make sure you're working on the most important thing. And then, like I said, having a morning routine makes such a big difference. Now, some people have a longer one. Some people will meditate or shower or work out. Whatever works for you, make sure that it's getting you in the zone and getting you energized. And then at the end of the day, once you get done with your done by 10:30, reset and replan for the rest of the day, what we call day 2, because you've just got more work done than most people get done in an entire day.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. So just imagine if every single day you started off with a great mindset, that you were able to first start out working on the most important things. How much of a difference would this make for you? Right? And imagine that you do this not just 1 day, but then 2 days and then 3 days. And every single day when you're working on the most important thing, you're actually moving things forward. So now instead of just feeling like you're not getting anything done, you're actually getting more done in half a day than most people get done in an entire day. And so the way that you can actually, yep, come on.
Double down on that. Just that's really important to for everyone. Just going back to my motto of simplify. It's like a gym membership, don't just go out and hammer yourself in the beginning. If you want to start with 2 days and 2 sprints, that's fine. Don't get bogged down on the structure of this, get bogged on the nuances. Make sure it fits your routine. Start slow. You'll feel the impact straight away, and then build up as you go, and work around, as you said, the family time. But start simple, start slow, feel the impact, and then build it up from there.
Absolutely. And to that point, I'd love to hear in the chat, anyone that's implemented this, just share what have been some of the secrets or the things that have worked for you. Because like I said, like we talk about this all the time, Austin doesn't have kids. So Austin's done by 10:30 looks different than like Pat and my done by 10:30, because of that. So there's always some nuances and some shifts that you can make. One of the important things to start this out with is actually prepping the night before. So just like I said, starting your week out by actually planning your week, You actually want to start your day out by planning the night before, right? So I allocate a little bit of time first off at the end of the workday to kind of close out the workday. And you look back, like what worked that day? What went well? What didn't? And what do you want to improve? Part of this is then saying, hey, what did I do today that I shouldn't be doing that I can delegate or offload? Then looking at the calendar the next day, is everything set up right? Do I have the right things on there? And then finally planning the next day and making sure that you're going in with the most important things to get done. So that way, when you start, you're done by 10:30 the next day, you already know what you're going to do and you can dive right in and start fast. Okay. Number 3 is mindset. And I'll tell you, this was one of my biggest challenges and still is at times, where we've got to have the mindset of, if anyone's read the book, actually pull it up here. One of the first things that we've got in the book, what got you here won't get you there. And this is something that I've had to remind myself and have other people remind me of, that when we go into this, there's going to be certain things that we've done that have built our company to this point. And one of the hardest things to do is to take those things and help get them off of our plate. So that's why when you guys come into 2X, one of the first things we look at is XDS. We want to understand, where is your time going today, so that we can then understand what we can work on getting off your plate, right? So first part here is basically saying, let me understand where my time goes, and then let me spend some time analyzing that. What level of activity is this? Does it take my energy or does it give me energy, right? And then what things should I get off my plate and how do I do that? Sometimes I do that purely with a system. Sometimes I do that with delegating. Sometimes I do that with both. But by understanding where your time goes today, what you can then start to do is to say, what can I get off my plate? And I always tell people, just start simple. Just like Pat said, if you start 1 or 2 days a week with done by 10:30, and you're just doing 1 or 2 sprints, that is going to start freeing up some of your time, because you're getting important things done that will then allow you to move on to more and more things. It's the same thing with this. Imagine if every week you just got one thing off of your plate, one thing that shouldn't be on your plate, one thing that you shouldn't be doing. Over the course of a year, you've gotten 52 things off your plate, freed up a whole bunch of time, and with that additional time, been able to get more off. So the momentum builds. So there's this popular thing when it comes to prioritization and looking at all of your tasks, which is how you prioritize your tasks makes a big difference for what you can get done. So when you're focused on reacting and on the small and less important tasks, what ends up happening, you can imagine those were like sand. If you pour sand or the small things into a cup, and then you put some pebbles in first, and then you ultimately put the big rocks, the important things done, everything won't fit in the cup, because all the little urgent tasks end up filling the bottom and you don't get to the important things. And unfortunately, that's what happens far too often for us. So one of the important things here, and it builds on done by 10:30, is if you simply put the rocks in first, which are your most important things, all those other tasks can ultimately fit in around those rocks, and you'll actually be able to get more done. Then this builds on, when we look at XDS and what we want to get off our plate, everything that we take or everything that we do that isn't a rock actually takes time away from the rock or the most important thing. So when you look at where your time's going, the rocks should be the most valuable thing that you can do. And if you need just sort of a guideline, think of these as the things that are $300 an hour. These are the things that you are very good at and only you can do, and it would be expensive to hire out. Then you can take a look at the pebbles. And these are tasks that aren't nearly as high value or expensive to hire out. And then ultimately you've got the sand, and these are the lower items. These are the admin work, the $15 an hour or less tasks. And so when you start thinking of your time and where it's being spent, every task that you do that's a $15 an hour task ends up taking time away from the $40 an hour task, the $300 an hour task, the $1,000 and beyond. So what we consistently want to be understanding is, what's the next task to get off my plate, and then delegate or create a system for it. And the more we do that, the more we remove all the sand, the more time you have then for the pebbles and rocks. And the more you remove the pebbles, the more time you're spending on the most valuable things. And that's where we want to get to. Okay. So once we've identified what it is that we need to get off our plate, the next thing is actually being able to do that, which is delegation. And I'll tell you, this is such a big challenge for most people. And especially when you're making that shift from being a solopreneur or having a small team to really scaling up to the next level. This is the way that most people end up delegating that causes a lot of issues. So you start out and you're overwhelmed. You go through the activity of XDS or something else and you realize that you need to delegate things. So then you pick the person and you delegate to them. You tell them that they now own this task. You didn't necessarily set them up for success. So when the task comes back, it's not done right. Then what you have to do now that the task is behind schedule and it needs to get done is you jump in, do the task. It ends up taking you longer. It ends up taking you more time than if you just did it yourself. And now you get into the mindset of, this is just easier to do myself. I don't want to delegate. Let me just take it all back. And that's such a dangerous place to get into because now instead of being able to scale, you end up taking everything back on your plate. So what we want to be able to do is to say, how can we delegate in a way that actually gives us confidence and sets our team members up for success? So the first part of this is that you're doing it, right? You're running the tasks and the activities. And when you realize you need to delegate, you go through XDS, you figure out the next thing you got to get off your plate, you create the system for it. And sometimes people overcomplicate systems or say they don't have time to do it. The reality is you're already doing the thing, right? So all we're going to do is the next time you do it, we're just going to have you document it. And there's different ways to do that. One of the ways that we love is a video recording. So the next time, let's say you're going to go and set up a website or something like that. Put Loom on, record your screen, and then just talk through what you're doing as you're doing it, and then send that to the person that you're going to give it to. So now you're handing off, hey, here's what it is that I need done. And then you give them what's called the definition of done, a DOD. You say, here's what needs to be done. Here's the expectations of when it's done. And then make sure that they understand and you're available for any questions. And this is the big part that people miss. Delegation does not just mean throwing tasks off to other team members and then letting it go and you going off and doing other things. A big part of this is the feedback loop, which means that you give clear expectations on what the results are. They then go and do it, and then you're giving feedback on it. And a big part of this is now you allowing yourself to actually coach your team and help them improve. Because when that happens, it goes from them doing the task to them ultimately owning the task and owning the system. So this may take a little more time for you as you get started. But what this allows over time is that you're not having to delegate and then hope it got done and then check back in, because you're putting the time in up front to develop your team so that they own it and you've got the confidence that this can run without you, which frees you up for those more valuable tasks. So usually when we walk through this, there's some questions or challenges that come up with delegation. So if you guys have any of those questions, pop them in the chat. We'll make sure we come back to it with a Q&A. And then finally, Pat's favorite question, how do we simplify and focus? So what's so easy to have happen when we're looking at all the previous things is there's so much to do. And even when we come up with a plan, that plan may be more than we can actually get done. So first things first, and I'd highly recommend you guys think in these terms, you want to schedule time for you and time for your family first. And what I mean by that is the most important person in your business is you. And if you take care of yourself, mind, body, soul, and you're in a good spot, you're going to be able to show up better for everyone else. But if you're consistently not getting enough sleep, not taking care of your health, and putting the business first, what ends up happening is that you get burnt out and you don't show up well for your customers, for your team, for your family, and for yourself. And unfortunately, this is a path that so many business owners get onto and they don't realize it until they've hit burnt out and now they don't want to do anything. So what we want to do is make sure you're taking care of yourself first. If you guys go back to my calendar, once again, I pulled this morning. Monday nights, I block off and I go and play golf. Every other night during the week, I've got family time blocked off, and it's very rare that I'll actually have something impede family time. So you guys should feel super special today because I ended up taking this training, which impedes a little bit on my family time. But once again, it's an exception, not the rule. And then if we look at it on Fridays, we do something really cool. And this is what I really want you guys to be thinking about as entrepreneurs. You guys get to set your own schedule. So something, a couple of years ago, I was traveling 4 or 5 days a week consulting for these different companies. And while that was amazing and I loved what I was doing, what it didn't allow me to do is to see my family. So I was gone in another city more than I was home. And so when I finally left that, when we were able to, have enough money to take care of ourselves, one of the things we implemented was something we call Friday family field trips. And so during the summer, every Friday, we basically take the day off and just go do something as a family. We go to the museum, we go to the park, we do things together. And so you'll see on here that I've got that blocked off every Friday and nothing comes in front of that. So I share this because you can build your own schedule. That's part of the beauty of being an entrepreneur. Now, it doesn't mean from day one, you're going to be able to block all these things off. Just like from day one, you might not be able to block done by 10:30 off every day. But over time, when you understand what you want your schedule to look like, every single week, you can start asking the question, what's the next thing I want to get off my plate? And what's the next thing I want to block off to take care of myself or to take care of my family, so that you're then building that schedule and that life that you want. So first thing I do during the week is we block everything off, and then I fit the business in beyond that, right? So I challenge you guys to think about, what does your ideal week look like, and start seeing how you can block off certain times now to take care of yourself and put the first things first, and then squeeze the business in around that. And a question that I always come back to is, what needs to be true, right? So when you say, hey, I would love to be able to take Fridays off and do a Friday family field trip, then the question is, what needs to be true to allow that to happen? Well, what do I end up doing on Fridays? And what can I do to either shift that or to delegate that or to put a system in place so that I don't have to do that anymore? So by thinking that way, now you can get clearer on what you need to do and what you need to work towards to allow you to do that. Okay, so we went through a lot. There were 5 major areas that we talked about. And none of this is going to mean anything to you if you guys don't come out with some actions. So first things first, if you guys don't have clarity on your vision and where you want to go, I'd recommend taking a little bit of time, pull out your vision if you've got it. If you haven't created one yet, allocate a little bit of time and figure out what it is that you really want. Why did you start this business? And if you look out into the future, what is it that you're really going after? Money is not the answer. Money may be a means to help you get that, but really think about what's going to make you happy, because that will then make every other decision you make easier. And then you can start defining goals that will lead you there, and it will help you prioritize. Second thing, if you're not proactively planning your week now, allocate a little bit of time and just reflect on the previous week. What went well? What challenges did you have? And then plan your week coming up. And some people like to do this on a Friday at the end of the week, and then they can go into the weekend feeling good. Some people like myself will do this during the weekend on a Sunday, but just make sure you're taking some time to proactively plan your week. Third thing, and I know sometimes this is a challenge for people, block off parts of your calendar. If we go back and look at my calendar, you'll notice that I've got time blocked off for weekly planning on Sundays. I've got time blocked off for done by 10:30 every morning. I've got some sporadic time blocked off during the week as I need it. And then one thing, I've kind of broken my own rule here for this week, but I typically block Thursdays off for deep work. So usually I don't take any meetings on those days, and I spend that time going deep on one thing. So one of the best things you can do is proactively block off your calendar so that you do have dedicated focused time for those most important things. Fourth, identify what are your most valuable tasks. What are the things that would cost you a lot to delegate out? And what are the things that you bring the most value to and move the business forward? Because that's where we want to be spending more of your time. And then you want to ultimately look at your morning routine, because you want to be able to optimize yourself in the morning so that you set yourself up for success. And one thing with this, and I work with a lot of people on morning routines, don't look at what everyone else is doing or what Forbes article says the top 5 things are. Think about what's going to set you up for success and give you energy in the morning, and do that. And just start simple with one thing at a time. It might be just waking up and drinking a glass of water. You get into that routine, it gets, you know, your body hydrated, and then next week you add something else to it. So make sure that your routine is actually giving you energy, not something that you feel obligated to have to do.
There's
And then
something good there as
finally,
well.
okay, go ahead.
Sorry, Tom, just on that, there's certainly everyone's morning routines are going to be different, and what works for you may not work for someone else 100%, but there are certain things that will absolutely not work for you. So getting up, checking email, getting up, checking Slack or text messages or Facebook or social, any of that sort of stuff may sound bleedingly obvious, but it's amazing how many people do it. And just by doing that, it drags your mind away from your deep work if you're about to start that, and it sets you up for failure. So stay away from, pretty much as a general rule, stay away from the outside world.
Yep. And to that point, one of the things I often talk about is creating your environment for success. And so that is your physical environment. So I've optimized all of my office space. So you guys can't really see it, but I've got whiteboards and I've got everything set up so that when I'm here, I'm in work mode and I have everything I need. But it also means setting yourself up mentally and in your online environment. So notifications are one of the worst things. So as scary as this probably sounds, start turning notifications off, because what notifications are is somebody else's priority, not yours, right? So I intentionally have time when I check email. I intentionally very rarely have time when I'll go on like Facebook or social media. But what you want to be doing is making sure that, to Pat's point, you're putting your priority first, and then you can go to the outside world and everybody else's priority. But you want to make sure that you're doing yours first.
And a good trick with that is don't install desktop apps. So it's a lot harder to control desktop apps. So things like Slack or Skype or any of those, you can access them through a browser, which means that you have to go in there before you get a notification, instead of having it installed and now suddenly you have to go and turn notifications off and stuff. Just use everything through your browser.
Yep, great tip. All right, and then the final thing here is, with your morning routine optimized, start implementing done by 10:30. You know, one of the biggest things that we hear from people, especially like when we do masterminds and stuff, is done by 10:30. It literally changes their life. And so when you start by doing the most important thing and putting your priorities in front of everyone else's, it's amazing how that not only sets up your day, but then starts making sure that you actually get the right things done, instead of getting to the end of the day feeling like you were busy, but not actually moving the ball forward.